Hi, welcome everyone. I see all of you joining in on the webinar. We're going to give our attendees just a minute or so to join, but welcome. Feel free to introduce yourself in the chat, what your name is, where you're from, and we will get started in a minute. Welcome. Hi to everyone who's joining. We're going to start in just a second. It looks like we have a good number of attendees already popping in. If you're just joining us, feel free to say hello in the chat. There is both a chat feature and a Q&A. We'll use the chat for now, and we'll get to questions in a little bit. We have a couple of notes in the Q&A that the chat is actually disabled. So we will take care of that. I'll start doing some intros, and we will let you know when the chat is up and running and you can pop in there. Otherwise, feel free to pop into the Q&A for now, but we will let you know when the chat is there for you to use. And in the meantime, I'm going to go ahead and get started so you can hear more from our wonderful speaker and less from me. But welcome everyone. We are so glad that you're here. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Megan McCann. I'm YSC's Director of Community Education. And this is one of a series of events. Over the next few months, YSC is hosting live streams, 3 in total, and 1 extra special event that you'll find out about, which is part of our Digitally Yours YSC Virtual Summit series. And as I said, this is the first event to take place in that series. We're specifically focusing on mental health for the first live stream. And tonight, YSC is excited to host this event specifically on post-traumatic stress and the impact of a breast cancer diagnosis as a young adult. It's a topic that we hear often about from you, our community, but also that it's just not talked about enough and there aren't enough resources. And so we are really excited to welcome tonight our incredible speaker, Julie Larson, who some of you may already have had the pleasure of hearing from at past events. And she'll walk you through some of what you might be wondering about as far as signs of PTSD after diagnosis, potential triggers, and ways you can manage those, both short and long term. And we will leave plenty of time for questions and discussion. And just a reminder, the information that's presented tonight is meant to be broad in nature and definitely does not take the place of individual consultation with a healthcare provider. We are going to provide you with a lot of information and you'll hear from others as well. And we try to make it as applicable to all of you as possible. But certainly, if you have questions that are unique to you and you feel there would be support for you in mental health counseling, please feel free to reach out for that additional support and get the unique and personalized consultation that would be right for you as well. As we said, the chat will be available for you to add insights as Julie is speaking during her presentation, and also just to for her to potentially pull from, to share some of those insights. Anything that is shared verbally, we won't include your name, but those insights can be shared with our audience as well. And then you can also use the Q&A so that when we get to that portion of the evening, we will see your questions. You can either ask your own or you can upvote as appropriate. And that will be there for you to use. We are recording, but only the presentation portion. So therefore, anything that you share, either within the chat or verbally, as we are able to unmute if somebody so chooses to later on, that will not be part of a recording. It will only be Julie's presentation, and that is for confidentiality reasons. We want you to all feel very comfortable in sharing and supporting each other in that way. And with all that being said, thank you for listening to my housekeeping items for the evening. I am really excited to introduce Julie Larson, our speaker. Julie is a licensed clinical social worker and has spent the entirety of her professional career in oncology supportive care. She graduated from Columbia University and began her career at Cancer Care, where she developed and directed the adolescent and young adult program. She's a trusted advocate for mental health care and has contributed to initiatives from the National Cancer Institute and Livestrong. Julie currently also sits on the medical advisory board for Stupid Cancer, Cactus Cancer Society, and Mercy One Richard Deming Cancer Center. She also has a private practice where she meets with survivors of all ages and diagnoses, using her training in cognitive behavioral therapy and mindfulness, and helping her clients strengthen their inherent strengths and strategies for navigating hardship. Julie is a sought-after speaker, as we know, because we love when she's able to speak at our events and lend her warmth and her expertise to the various topics that we present, as well as at other cancer conferences and professional organizations. She also contributes to Coping and Cure magazines and has been a guest on numerous health and wellness podcasts. Excitingly, Julie also has a TED Talk called Living in the End, which is based on her 17 years of clinical work, watching the resilience of individuals facing unexpected medical diagnosis. She also has a private practice in Des Moines, Iowa, and is the proud parent of 4 children. Amazing. Julie's amazing. And with that, I will turn it over to Julie. Thank you so much.
Hi. Oh, thank you so much for having me. I love being here. I'm going to cut that bio down. It's too much about me. I'm going to say much more about you guys. And I see the number of participants that we have, and that is fantastic. I'm so glad that all of you have taken the time to sit back and join us tonight. We're going to talk about a really important topic. I'm going to get over to my slides here in a second. But I just want you to know that tonight, I just want to meet you in this place of a diagnosis of cancer brings up so much. What do we do with that? How do we understand how this is going to affect us over time? And what do I need to be watching for when it's not working well for me? So we're going to kind of cover a lot of things. If you have a piece of paper and a pen, I'd grab it, because it is my hope that something that I say is meaningful enough to you that you write it down, that you chew on it, that you think about it for yourself later, and that we can give you some actual strategies and tools tonight too. I think they are working hard to get that chat rolling, and I am keeping my fingers crossed because I love it when the chat is active. So hopefully that chat gets rocking and rolling, and you can connect and you can comment and you can share and you can be active there as I speak and find one another. You finding each other is so important. But if not, use the Q&A and we will find those questions. Later, we'll have a chance to raise your hand and ask things and talk together. Let's get moving. Let's see what we got here. Okay, nurturing growth after a diagnosis of breast cancer. Growth. That seems like a word that maybe we don't associate with it, or that it feels really conflicting to say. I'm just going to say that out loud, that maybe there's a hope for that, but maybe that also feels really kind of dismissive and minimizing of really how the complexity of this experience. But let's hold on for a second. When you hear the word from your doctor, you have cancer, it is a moment of information overload as you work to understand what in the heck that means. And where do I move forward? How do I make sense of the best treatment decision for me? Uncertainty and fear, all kinds of swimming questions around who do I tell? When do I tell them? Why would I tell people? Fear and worry, pressure, uncertainty, questions about how is all this treatment that I'm going to go through to treat my cancer, how is it going to impact my body over the long haul, especially as a young person? So if that sounds like you, and that's kind of how you were feeling, that are lots of things that are coming up in that time of diagnosis, that is normal. Feelings that go along with that. People walk into my office filled with fear, sadness, guilt, anger, which can also show up in like words like irritability and frustration, emotional numbness. And numbness can be just kind of blank, but numbness can also be like just feeling like you're never getting started on anything, just kind of spinning and never feeling like anything is getting done. And that I think that's kind of a freeze response. We're not able to kind of move a little bit. Uncertainty, worry, pressure. And all of these feelings are normal emotional responses to cancer. They may be completely abnormal for your general makeup and wiring, and that feels really abnormal for you to be in this space, but it is normal for a cancer diagnosis. And sometimes when I just even say that in my office, I watch shoulders go down and people to feel a bit of relief that how they're coping, which feels really, really different for them, is actually right on track. The other thing I'll say, and especially given that we're talking about post-traumatic stress or post-traumatic growth tonight, is that, and I think this is important to know too, I have a private practice, so I'm not working in a cancer center. Very few people walk into my office at the time of diagnosis. Relatedly, very few people walk into my office or call to make appointments while they're going through treatment. During those periods of time in the cancer trajectory, you're surrounded. You're surrounded by medical professionals. You're surrounded by the team at the hospital. Many friends and family come swooping in. So people feel quite supported or at least surrounded in that time. And the majority of people that I work with do not call me seeking support until after all of their active treatment is done, and they look up and they're like, well, what now? Or 3, 6, 9 year after their diagnosis, when everybody else is like, oh, we're done and it's so great. And people are feeling like, I am not the same at all. And certainly if we have anybody in this room who is managing a chronic or a metastatic disease, I think that exemplifies the chronicity of how this is impacting your life. And those patients that I have that are managing advanced stage or chronic or metastatic disease, there's an ongoing need to be facing these feelings in the midst of people who are just moving on with life around them. What are some of those messages? So when the screen before we're feelings, those are feeling words, right? What are some of the messages, the narratives in our mind around this? Will the cancer come back or will it progress? Will I get a secondary cancer related to these treatments that I'm having? Gosh, I'm putting a ton of medicine, poison, whatever we want to call it, in my system to kill cancer. How's that going to affect me? Again, I'm quite young. Where's that going to take me? Will I recognize the symptoms? What am I supposed to be paying attention to? What do I dismiss? Is it okay to call my doctor? Is it not? Then these 2 questions down here at the bottom, I hear a lot, and sometimes we don't name them out loud. The worry or the rustle of unsettledness around, am I doing enough? Am I doing everything that I can do? Especially when treatment ends or when things are quieter, or am I overdoing it? Here I am, I had that moment of wake up call, razor sharp perspective, and years or time has gone on and I'm right back in the spin and the hustle and my life is stressful again. And holy cow, am I back to this place of overdoing it? And how's that going to affect me? So I don't know if our chat's working now. I don't know if where we are, but if that's resonating for you, or if they're thinking or feeling different things, share that in there and we can all kind of notice and see that together. PTSD. So I've said all those other feelings back there, right? But what is PTSD, or what are these other clinical responses to cancer? So I'm just going to read some of these statistics. Studies have shown that 4 to 22% of cancer survivors have a risk of developing PTSD. So that doesn't mean that you're developing it. It means you have a risk. And there are certain risk factors that go into what makes someone more at risk or not at risk for post-traumatic stress disorder. What is it? And I don't think I have this. I have that third bullet point of PTSD includes intrusive thinking, irritability, sleeplessness. It's so all that kind of like buzz, like on edge, like highly vigilant state, which and the piece of that makes it a clinical diagnosis is that it's interfering with functioning. It's interfering with quality of life. Most every survivor has intrusive thoughts, has anxiety, has worry, fear, sadness, grief, right? But when those thoughts are intruding and interfering with your ability to function, then we need to look at it in a closer way. So everybody can have intrusive thoughts or ruminating, spinning worry, but if you can figure out ways to see it, catch it, shift your focus and attention, care for yourself, then that is you beginning to kind of build those muscles for self-care. If you're unable to do that, if those intrusive thoughts are kind of coming again and again, we're going to look at it a little differently. But before we get there, I want to finish this presentation because I'm going to give you a lot of strategies for managing those thoughts and feelings, and then we can kind of watch over time. These symptoms can cause people, survivors, to avoid places or things that remind them of remind them of an event, and then that can cause delays in follow-up care. So when, again, these ways of attempting to cope, attempting to protect and care for yourself, get in the way of adhering to treatment, going to a doctor, getting out and connecting again to life and your quality of life. When it's getting in the way of that healthy functioning, then we have a problem. You can have those feelings, but you're still finding your way into the doctor. You're still calling to kind of get a scan or to get a question answered. You're not avoiding that. So I think that's important to recognize. We don't want to diagnose it, but we also want to make sure that people know that if that is happening to you, that we need to kind of look at it in a little bit of a closer way. When I said there are people more at risk, I'm going to pop back up here to bullet point number 2. People who experience pain, which is often unrelenting and kind of persistent, advanced cancer, or have suffered other types of trauma in their life, those individuals may be at more risk. Why is this important? And sometimes I'm going to bring in when we talk about that's post-traumatic stress disorder. We're going to also talk about post-traumatic growth here in a second. And post-traumatic growth can include weaving in mindset. And so why is mindset so important? And does it even really matter? Well, I think it matters. I mean, I'm a mental health professional, so obviously I'm biased. But I think if I sit with people, they will be very quick to tell me that cancer is much more than a physical disease, right? It absolutely is medical, physical, but there is a distinct impact from a cancer diagnosis on your mental and your emotional well-being. And that psychological, social, and spiritual impact of cancer can be relentless. People can begin to feel healthier, feel stronger in their bodies. They can begin to manage their fatigue, all those things. But that psychological impact can be relentless. And catastrophic or spiraling negativity and can drive anxiety and depression. So sometimes the way in which that negativity in our mind, the way in which our mind is spinning, that can be a component or a factor that drives more anxiety and depression. We know that anxiety and depression, different than PTSD, are 2 to 3 times more common for cancer survivors. Okay, and that's a clinical diagnosis of anxiety and depression. We throw around these words quite a lot, but they all have clinical definitions. There are many, many factors. These are 5, but there are many factors that influence a particular individual's response to their cancer experience, their interactions with their care team, right? If you've had a really meaningful, supportive, you feel understood, you feel heard interaction with your care team, you're going to have a different response to your experience than somebody who has felt that they've been dismissed, minimized, no one's ever really getting it or understanding them, or they feel like somebody's talking through or around them to other people in their family. So your interaction with your care team is significant. The social support network that surrounds you, whether it's who you live with, whether it's your friends and family, are you close to the people that matter to you? A lot of adolescents, not necessarily adolescents, but a lot of young adults may live far from their, nucleus, their family of origin. So how is that? Are you trying to stay connected to your normal life while going through treatment, or have you moved back home? How did that affect the relationships around you? your coping style. So whatever you walked into cancer as a coping style, that's going to influence how you respond during your cancer experience, your personality, and your past experiences. Some of these things right here, you have absolutely no control over, right? You didn't design it. You didn't sign up for it. It's just how you're wired. It's just what you walk into, past experiences. It is what it is, but they definitely impact your cancer experience. So what's post-traumatic growth? Okay. So post-traumatic growth is it's when a life event shakes us to the core. So think of that kind of just like like in an imagery way. When it shakes you to core, it doesn't deny distress. This has been something that's been really, has had a huge and powerful impact on you. But it proposes that adversity can unintentionally yield changes in the way we understand ourselves, the way we view and understand other people, and the world around us. Okay, so it challenges that the beliefs and the perspectives that we've held, and it forces us to see things in a different way. So I can sit with cancer survivors who tell me, hold on, I never, if you would have told me this before I was diagnosed, I would have never believed you. And now here I am, and I can see it and feel it and realize it in a completely different way. That is when your experience with cancer, your coping, your walking through this journey has forced you or completely shifted the way in which you see yourself or perhaps somebody else or the world. It's more than resilience. Resilience is persevering through a challenge, right? It's more than that. It is the capacity to reflect on what you've just went through, how you did it, and how you've grown, how you've changed in a way that's meaningful, and it is growth. So, and I think that that's important to say, and I just want to kind of level set right now in case everybody's suddenly feeling a great deal of pressure and kind of overwhelm. It post-traumatic growth doesn't happen for every survivor, and that's okay. That doesn't mean we've failed cancer or it's something that's fine. You're getting through this experience and getting to a place where you can navigate and manage uncertainty and fear when it bubbles to the surface, that you can reconnect with life in a way that feels meaningful to you, that and you adjust, quote unquote, adjust to life in this new space. That is making it through, right? If you're somebody that has kind of completely shift your perspective about yourself and about the world, that's post-traumatic growth. But that doesn't need to happen in order for you to adjust to a cancer diagnosis or adjust to life after cancer. Okay, so just to be clear. So how are we going to move from here? Before I do that, Megan, or are there any questions in the chat that I might want to talk about before we move forward? I'm just going to pause for a quick second and see if there's anything in the chat that might be meaningful to kind of, or not the chat, the Q&A.
Yeah, and thank you, Julie, for prompting. I was actually going to say, so the chat is unfortunately not enabled at the moment. So please put whatever you'd like in the Q&A. We can see everything that you put in there, whether it's a chat or a Q&A, we're going to put it all in one place. So there are actually a couple of great questions. One, the most recent question, as you were talking about post-traumatic growth, points to, is it possible to go back and forth between PTSD and post-traumatic growth?
I think so, yes. So PTSD, trauma, just trauma in general, like the experience of trauma in general, the nuts and bolts, the most basic definition is something has happened that is outside of my capacity to cope with it. Okay. And that's why it's very personal, because the same event could happen to two different people, including a cancer diagnosis, right? And one person finds and builds the skills and the ability to cope with it, and one person is flailing and it doesn't have what they need in order to do that, right? And we have risk factors for why that is the case. But yes, if you are somebody that's experiencing PTSD, like this is overwhelming, this is too much to cope with, over time, often not in the trenches, But over time, you may be able to get a different view on the entirety of the experience. I often say the healing and the response, the way we heal through PTSD is to begin to turn the lights on in the rest of the room. So when somebody has gone through PTSD, there's a very narrow frame of what this experience was, and it was scary, it was frightening, it was overwhelming, it was too much, right? And as we begin to find ways to calm our body through that, which we've got to think about how that affects our body, calm our body in that, and with therapy or with support or over time, you can begin to color in the rest of the room. Oh, you know what? When I think back to that moment that was just overwhelming and so much for me, I am now able to recognize that so many people that I love immediately circled around me and cared for me. And in fact, those relationships have 100% changed and deepened for me. As I look back and now that I see it with some time and some distance, I can recognize that it is unbelievable the amount of courage it took me to walk into that hospital or walk into that procedure. And I did that very slowly and methodically and intentionally. And you can look back on that past self and begin to see it in a different way. And I use that kind of figurative language of coloring in the rest of the room, but that's the way we begin to heal from those experiences. I don't know if that makes sense. And yes, of course, as you do that, you can begin to watch and recognize there are changes in me, or as I look at this self me that's gone through this, I'm just amazed at what I've been able to do and really feel maybe proud of that. I hope that answers your question. Megan, what else? And then we'll keep moving.
Yeah, there's a couple more. One you kind of just touched on, so more so if there's anything you would add. One of the first questions we had was when you were speaking about looking at PTSD differently or looking at it in a closer way. And so that person was just asking, if a case of severe PTSD, how do you go about looking at it differently or more closely? And I know you touched a little bit about that just now, but if there's anything else you would add.
Yeah. So I'm gonna just kind of say, yes, a lot of these feelings can feel overwhelming and can feel the experience of walking through intense anxiety. A lot of kind of like when the bottom falls out below you, fear and uncertainty of the future, awkwardness and irritability, or kind of out of syncness with friends and family. A lot of these feelings, which may be new and navigating them, can feel really unfamiliar and a little bit dicey. And so we've got to learn skills to do that. And so I want to just mention that process of figuring out how to care for yourself in a new experience takes time, and it takes effort, to be honest. It takes some discipline and some effort to look at that and compassion of how we do that in a different way. We're going to zoom through some slides here, and I'm going to give you some skills. I'm going to give you some strategies to begin to watch and to think about how you're doing and how you take care of yourself. If those things, if you don't begin to feel, okay, I'm beginning to notice that's making a difference, I'm beginning to notice that's helping me, or I'm finding ways to surf, I'm finding ways to do this. If that's not helping, then we may need to look at this in a closer way clinically. So do you need to have a therapist that you're meeting with on a regular basis that provides some scaffolding and some kind of support so that to help you? Is there a need for medication? Because the edge of these feelings is kind of, I need to soften the edges of that so that I can actually do the work. So that's what I mean by, if you're not able to grab it, if these things aren't helping over a period of time, then, maybe it means me connecting with a professional. Okay. Sometimes I tell people to circle the date on the calendar. This day is just horrible. It's the most crummy day ever. I'm circling it on my calendar. I'm a level 10. And then let's see how we are in a month or a week or, a month, and see if that's changing over time. If it's not, we need to look at that. You can feel differently.
We have a lot of really great questions and comments. I'm going to pass it back to Julie for a little bit, and we can keep those coming. We're definitely saving time. And Julie, when you want to stop and answer or hear from people, we can certainly jump back in. But
Okay.
definitely, everyone, keep those coming in the Q&A. That's great. Thank
I
you.
love it. And Megan, we've just given you a giant job. So I'm going to keep talking. And if I answer things as we go, great. And if I don't, you're in charge of sorting. Okay.
Sounds good.
We're going to come back and forth, and I'll bounce back to you from time to time too. So don't worry, friends. We'll get to you. Okay. Let's keep moving here. So how do we do this, friend? What do we do? I say to all of my patients that walk into my office and every audience that I speak to, my first line of homework for you is to cultivate a habit of noticing. Okay. We just walk through our days kind of experiencing it. Sometimes these emotions and the way we care for ourselves just kind of intuitively or instinctively comes up. Stop, slow down. How am I doing? That's what I mean. Can you just check in, wake up? How am I doing? What am I feeling? Okay, I am feeling a little irritable today. I'm feeling impatient. Or maybe I'm feeling quite calm. I'm feeling at ease. I'm feeling overwhelmed today. I'm feeling a great deal of dread. What I am doing right now is I'm naming the feeling. Okay, so bullet number 2. So checking with your, how am I doing? Can you name the feeling that you're having? Can you just take a quick body scan and inventory? How's my body? Like, where am I feeling this in my body? Yeah, there's like this gnaw in my stomach, or like there's just, I can't quite explain where it is in my body, but there's this edge to me that I can feel. I'm fast today. Or I just feel real heavy, my shoulders. I have a headache, feel tired, and it's not really a tiredness that makes sense. So, where do I feel it in my body? Here's a great question. What am I doing right now that's helping me? And what am I doing that's not working? Okay, I have just looked up after being stuck in my phone for like the last 30 minutes. That is not helping. I am sitting here and I'm just fortune telling and I'm going through all of the what ifs in my brain. That's not helping me. Okay, you know what? Getting outside and taking the dog for a walk, that's helping me. That's helping me get back to grounded. Okay, taking a drink of water, that's helping me. Getting up and turning on some music, that's helping me. What is it? Can you begin to build this awareness of A, how am I doing? What's that feeling I'm having? What's going on in my body? What's helping? What's not working so well? Okay, so there's some homework. I want you to begin to cultivate that habit. I think of stress, it shows up in our body in 3 ways. Shows up, period, in 3 ways. It shows up in our thinking, right? Thinking. It shows up in our emotions, overwhelm, sadness, loneliness, dread, irritability, impatience. It shows up in our body, right? I just talked about a lot of examples for those 3 different ways. So good news, and this is the way I want you to think about it. That means you've got 3 entrance ramps for taking care of yourself. We can begin to take care of ourselves in our thinking. We can begin to take care of ourselves in our emotions and soothing and tending to our emotions. And we can begin to take care of ourselves with our body. Okay. So what does that mean? What are those ideas? Here's your body. I think a lot of times we live in a culture, America, young, where we're thinkers. And so we immediately, when we have distress, want to kind of attack what was going on in our mind. But, and that's fine. And insight is really, really meaningful. But I think sometimes we skip over this very important piece of finding some calm. And when your body is calm, you not only feel better, but you're going to act smarter, right? So if you can imagine a moment in your life where you were really activated, so you're really frustrated, or you were just really emotional, the choices, the decision making, the way you're sorting through information in your mind is probably a bit cloudy and a little distorted. And so if we can find some calm and get those feelings quieted, then probably your mind's going to also come back on track. Okay? Well, how do we do that? Using your body. So your body, 5 senses are pretty strong. And some of you in the room might know these things. Bravo. Others of you, this is new information. But with your 5 senses, one of the things I tell my clients to do is an exercise called 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Can you name 5, and we're going to go through all 5 senses and count down. Can you name 5 things that you see? Okay, in my space right now, I see my lamp, I see my plant, I see my teacup, I see my clock, I see my pencils, right? 4 things that you hear. I hear my clock ticking. I hear the car outside. I hear someone in the hall. Okay, can keep going through that. 4 things. 3 things that you feel, not emotionally, but on your body. Like I feel the seat under my legs. I feel the shirt on my skin. I feel the temperature of the room on my skin. Okay, 2 things that you smell, 1 thing that you taste. Now, I don't know if you notice as I'm doing it, we're having to get quieter and quieter and focus our attention more and more. See is so easy, but as you do here, we had to stop and we had to really pay attention, feel, smell, taste. And what that's doing is it's changing our attention from our worry and our fear and our uncertainty, this movie up here, to our body. And we really have to focus in. So you can do it once, you can do it again. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 can slow your body down. You can break time into chunks, make things a little bit more manageable. All I'm going to do is get from now until lunch or lunch until dinner. You can sort your thoughts, right? Okay, so that thought is for the future, my future self. That is a future-oriented thought. That thought is about the past. I don't have control over that. So you can delegate some of those things. I'm going to give that to my future. This is a really important thing that I'm worrying about, but it's nothing that I can do today, but I'm going to give it to my future self. I'm going to go ahead and just give that to my future self, and my future self will deal with that. And then anything that's grounding, eye contact gets you right back now in here, a self hug. That is, there's evidence and research around hugging, whether that's another person or yourself, activates your parasympathetic nervous system, which quiets and calms your body. So sometimes I just tell clients to just give them a hug, kind of sway, get your body moving, and that's going to quiet your body. Okay. So we can first try attending to our bodies. Now let's think about your thoughts. Let's go right into some of those questions. So often underneath worry, and then anxiety is the tipping point of worry, is an unanswered question, right? So what are those questions? Some common ones that I hear is, when is my cancer most likely to recur? What does that mean? Like, if it were to come back, when would it come back? What are the doctors looking for when they do these follow-up visits? Like, why am I going? And what are they looking for? And what's the purpose of the blood work? What are they finding? When should I contact my medical team? Should I call them every time? Should I call them only this? What are these questions? Did my treatment put me at risk for future health issues? How are those going to be monitored? What are my options for managing pain or getting through follow-up procedures? When am I going to get these results? We just did this scan. We just did this. When am I going to get those results? How are they going to come to me? Is somebody going to call me? Or just going to show up in my portal? What's my worst case scenario, right? So some of these questions we might be able to get real concrete answers for, right? And that can be really leveling and kind of calming, just to kind of get some answers to these questions. It might be exactly what drives the next conversation with your medical team. So step one is sit down with that worry, sit down with that thinking, and see if you can find any questions in there. Some of those questions may be in the form of what if, right? What if this, what if? And so I've got what do we got here? 1, 2, 3, 4 shifts to what if. You might take a picture of this slide. What if, can you change your what if to what is? So what if, I don't have any control over that. I don't have a crystal ball. I do not know. So I'm going to change my what if to what is right in front of me. Okay. What's going on right now? I feel strong. I feel healthy. I can tell my hair is growing back. I can feel that my energy is different than it was before. What is? What if to what else? Are there other possible truths? Gosh, I feel like a real tenderness over here and like my lymph node area. I'm worried that it's spread. I'm worried that there's something showing up over there. You know what, if I think about it, I also was carrying that new really heavy bag yesterday, or I was working in my garden, or I was lifting a lot of it. That could also be it. So are there other possible truths? What if to then what? Okay. So maybe your mind just keeps coming back to the yes, but, yes, but, yes, but wheel, right? Just sometimes it can be really kind of settling to just go with your worst case scenario. Okay, you know what? If it shows progression, if it shows recurrence, then what? Okay, then I will sit with my medical team and I will figure out a next treatment plan. I will begin to learn the what my options are. Sometimes when we follow out our worst case scenario and come up with a very concrete plan, that too can be settling and calming, that we don't actually fall off a cliff, that there's going to be a next step. There's going to be something next. And it also illuminates that it's not at all where you are today. So it makes it a lot easier to see, okay, now that I'm way over here in worst case scenario land, it is very obvious to me that that is not actually where I am at 8 o'clock on Thursday night, right? This is where I'm at, very different than my current reality. And then what if to what's left? So sometimes, and I think what I mean by that is sometimes our worry and our fear and our uncertainty and our trauma can be taking center stage and eclipsing everything else about who we are and what's surrounding us. So sometimes we need to step out of our own spotlight and say, oof, I'm going to put this over here for a second. What else? What's going on with you? What else do I need to do for my job, for my children, for my partner, I need to take this dog for a walk. I got to get out of my own way. I got to move into some other part of myself. So kind of this, what else? What's left? This is a big deal, cancer and how I'm doing, but I got to get out of this a little bit, parachute out. Let going of the fight. So this is kind of the feeling. So when we look at the feelings that show up, I think that it may be unrealistic, honestly, to think that fear and worry may completely go away. In fact, sometimes it's not uncommon for survivors to be spending a tremendous amount of energy trying to button it up and get rid of it and not let it kind of rule. And sometimes it is helpful to just let it come, let it wash over you, name it and claim it. Today, I am not myself. I am not at my best. I am really teary. I'm really emotional. It's just kind of hit me hard today. I'm kind of a little raw and I feel fragile and I feel a great deal of worry and overwhelm, and it's making me feel quite sad. It's just where I am today. It's just sadness and loneliness is walking right with me, side by side. This is where I'm at. And sometimes it's helpful to just have moments where you name it, claim it, let it come right in. When we name a feeling, we create just a little bit of distance from that. So instead of I am sad or I am overwhelmed, if we say I am feeling overwhelmed, I am feeling very sad today, then we create that space where you are still existing, all of you and what's capable and what's strong about you. And you are in the presence of this feeling that is quite sad and overwhelming to you today, but you have the capacity to make a choice for what you're going to do with that feeling, right? And it helps us to build some tolerance for an uncomfortable feeling, and we can have some attention. If we that feeling can live in the background. We're not fighting it. It's there. I'm accepting it. I'm knowing that it's there. It's not comfortable. But at the same time, I can make dinner for my family. I can answer emails for work. I can go get the grocery shopping done. I can take a shower and get ready for my day. It's a fascinating thing, but when we feel stressed or when we feel these emotions, it's happening in your limbic system in your brain. I'm pointing back here. It's the back. It's the oldest part of our brain, right? Limbic system. And that's where fight, flight, or freeze are located, right? And we feel just hijacked by that feeling. And if we're kind of existing in our day, kind of that with those feelings driving the bus, feels a little bit more fragile. The second that you say, I am feeling frustrated, I am feeling overwhelmed, I am feeling a great deal of sadness, then we immediately draw a line from that limbic system of our brain all the way up here and light up our prefrontal cortex, which is where our language center is. So the second that you name it, you've lit up your language center of your brain, which is also where judgment, impulse control, decision-making, emotional regulation, that's all where this is located. So you've just turned on the part of your computer, the part of your brain that can help you to make smart choices about what you're going to do now with this feeling of sadness, what you're going to do with this feeling of overwhelm or irritability. And I think I've got this slide coming up here. I tell people all the time, there it is, that self-care is balance, right? Sometimes I'm gonna skip down here to the second one I have there, discipline versus compassion. Sometimes when we are not feeling our best, you wake up in a day and you're like, I am not okay today. I am fragile. I am just heavy and overwhelmed. Sometimes when we recognize and we notice that feeling, it's important to have compassion. Cut yourself a break, lower your expectations, cancel out of some things, be gentle, be easy, go to bed, whatever you need to do, just cut yourself a break and have some compassion for yourself. On the other hand, sometimes we need to notice that, okay, I have been laying around for a week. I am still feeling this way. I gotta get out. I gotta get in the shower. I gotta get outside and take the dog for a walk. I gotta call a friend. I gotta do something. So your self-care, and I don't have a manual for that, but it's your awareness of where am I on my tipping of my self-care, where I've got to cut myself a break and take good care of myself, or I gotta do something. Discipline, self-compassion, discipline. This takes me back to this circle of emotion. Then I'm going to pause. I'm going to see where Megan is with questions, but this is the circle of emotion. I think of emotional moments in a circle, and I paint that picture a lot for my the client patients that I work with. That we have a moment, we've been triggered, something's happened that's triggered us, and we feel a great, or maybe we just wake up with it someday. There's the emotion, and I think that there is an incredible amount of value and importance in noticing that feeling and allowing it space and giving yourself permission. You didn't design this moment, right? You didn't ask for your cancer diagnosis. You didn't ask for the way that it's changed your life. You didn't design the fact that you've got to keep doing these other things in the presence of also managing your, your survivorship. And so it is understandable that you feel many of these feelings. They are normal. They are understandable. Allow them some time, honor them, let yourself see them, right? Care for yourself, be gentle. But on the other hand, I wouldn't be a good therapist if I said we're going to set up camp and we're going to live there, right? Because you do need to function. You do need to kind of connect with your life and connect with people that matter to you and move in some way. So when we notice that feeling, I want you to have compassion and care for it and notice it. But then you might ask, what am I needing? And where do I have control? What is my next step? And that's your circle, right? So we're going to have the feeling, we're going to allow for it, we're going to give ourselves grace and compassion and gentleness. And then we might say, what is this feeling telling me that I'm needing? I'm needing connection. I'm needing calm. I'm needing play. I'm needing respect. I'm needing to matter. I'm needing, what are you needing? And then what's my next step forward? I'm going to call a friend. I'm going to go take a shower. I'm going to lay down and go to bed, right? So what's the next place that you have control? I'm going to leave it here. I'm going to check in with you, Megan, and then we'll bounce back. What's going on over there on chat? Our question.
Yeah, no. So thank you so much to everyone who's sharing and for your comfort in sharing with us. We really appreciate your vulnerability, and there's some really good questions and comments. For those who maybe just joined or joined while we were speaking still, we are using the Q&A for both chat and questions, so feel free to pop in there. Also, as a reminder, you can post something in there anonymously, so if that is more comfortable to you, please feel free to do that. There's a great conversation going on actually from a few individuals who've experienced multiple or simultaneous traumas. So for example, perhaps they went through a totally not cancer related trauma previous to their diagnosis. There are a few folks who mentioned that. And so then of course that leads to kind of the unraveling, unpacking, navigating of not only their breast cancer trauma, but others. And so just any insights you have on how to navigate such situations and how to kind of peel back the layers when it's not only one set of, say, triggers or anxieties that they might be dealing with.
You said the word triggers. I mentioned the word triggers in that emotional circle. I think a really wise step is beginning to really name and understand. I say heat map your triggers so that that's a way of protecting yourself, or at least not that you're going to avoid them or that you have the ability to avoid them, right? But that you are aware this is a group of people, this is a date on a calendar, this is a space where I feel particularly fragile, or it really kind of can make me feel a degree of panic and overwhelm. So knowing, and I think that if you can kind of conceptualize that idea of heat mapping, that can kind of begin to help you know where you're safe and not safe. I would also say that those exercises that are around grounding and calming your body aren't a good idea. They're critical. They're vital. So your body, when we're in kind of experiencing trauma after trauma, is constantly in a hyper vigilant state of like arrested, right? So how you learn to notice that and quiet and calm. And that is a skill. And when I say that, sometimes it feels like that's impossible. It's not impossible, but and sometimes it's helpful to do with another person. So that's where a therapist, or even like there are classes in mindfulness-based stress reduction that help us to kind of learn this skill of noticing ourselves and coming back to the breath, coming back to the breath. The value of meditation, and people are like, I can't ever meditate. Like, that's crazy. Or I don't know how to sit and do that. The work of that, if you think about that as like going to the gym, the work of meditation is not that you're sitting quiet and breathing. It's that your brain and your body, and often your feelings are inherently going to travel, right? Your mind thinks that's its job. So your mind is going to go, and your body might go, your feeling might go with it. And your work is to notice it, see it, catch it, bring it home. And that's the bicep curl, right? So that later when you're met with a uncomfortable, awkward conversation with someone, or you're met with a trigger, you've got some muscles there. See it, catch it, bring it home, and quiet. And so you're learning that skill of when I feel my body get activated, I'm learning what it means to get quiet. And sometimes it's easier to practice that when you're having a good day. Sometimes people walk into therapy and they're like, I don't know now what's going on. I'm feeling kind of good. And I'm like, awesome. Let's talk about why that is and what's working for you. And now that you're not in that state where you're in as overwhelmed or activated, we can really kind of watch and measure how it feels to notice and to calm our bodies. It's easier to do when you're feeling okay. So if there's a day that feels lighter or easier, practice that, build that muscle.
There's a
Okay.
great follow-up question to that of just if you could talk a little bit more about heat map triggers and what those are.
Okay, so that's my metaphor. So what I mean by that when I say that is, I would encourage every survivor to begin to notice what are the quote unquote things that leave me feeling unsettled. Is it hot topics? As soon as people start talking about diet and exercise, or God doesn't give you anything you can't handle, I just notice something in me gets edgy, right? Maybe it's, when I get to this season in the calendar year, when the leaves start to change and the weather starts to get cooler, I notice I'm not myself. Well, come to think about, this was the time my symptoms started showing up and I started going to the doctor to see what was going on. It's bringing all that back. Another trigger can be certain people, right? So what I mean by that is, can you begin to identify in your day-to-day, as you're walking through your day-to-day, why am I feeling, what's going on? Is it, another one that people talk to me a lot about is just sitting and watching TV at night, and then a pharmaceutical ad comes on and they're totally hit with it, right? So where do you notice when you get kind of hijacked are your feelings? That's what I mean by heat mapping. That's my kind of metaphor for when you begin to notice what your triggers are.
There are a few comments which then lead into another question as well, but just a few comments and observations that a lot of individuals start to actually feel more symptoms of PTSD or trauma in the maintenance phase of treatment or survivorship for some, as opposed to the actual, trauma you might receive around diagnosis and early stages of treatment. So that's just something that came up a lot in the chat. And then there's a question which I think leads into this, because it just highlights how maybe for those who are finished with active treatment, when you move into, say, the post-treatment phase, there's a new set of factors, such as there's a question around, just being triggered by people around you being sick, or having to worry about your immunity, or thinking about reoccurrence, like you had mentioned earlier, Julie, is that even though kind of the initial shock might be over of your diagnosis and treatment, do those other feelings ever go away, when you're triggered by things like a family member coming home sick from work or school, or being in a public place, or scanxiety, as we all refer to it, as far as fear of recurrence. Do those feel her question is, do those feelings ever really
Never
go
go away,
away?
because boy, this feels heavy and this feels hard right now. Megan, these are such beautifully articulated comments and questions. So I second your saying thank you to those who are sharing and bringing that. You are naming what I said earlier, that most, I'm going to go ahead and say most survivors don't truly feel the mental and emotional impact, or the significant, the way, the depth of that impact, until after treatment is over, or after that initial diagnosis period is worn off. I think it's in that phase, you're really kind of learning about your diagnosis, and you're also learning about your treatment options, and you're also managing side effects, and you're also very busy with a calendar of going here, there, whatever, what your appointments are. That when it all slows down and stops, it starts to all swim and bubble up, which then can make people feel like there's something wrong with them. Why aren't they recovering? Why aren't they feeling better? I am uniquely struggling. The way I am feeling and the degree of unsettledness within me must obviously be worse than everybody else. And it's certainly not me. So this is so different than who I was before cancer, that I'm a mess. So all of that can happen. And that's why I say that is actually normal. It is normal that the intensity of your mental and emotional impact is often not felt or recognized or experienced until after treatment is over. And I think it's really tricky too, because I don't know how much people are made aware that that's going to happen. So, if that is where you sit right now, in some ways you're right on track. Ooh, that's weird to think that, but you're in the kind of the graduate degree course now of self-care. Like, how do I now take care of myself? What do I do to take care of this? Do these feelings ever go away? To that person, is this ever going to change? My answer to that is, this is like grief, not like grief. This often is grief, right? This is grief. You've lost certain ways of approaching and living your life, a sense of carefreeness, a sense of ease, a sense of nonchalance and spontaneity. And it's been replaced by this kind of persistent worry, this persistent, unrelenting kind of hypervigilance. And there's grief in that. That's sadness. And like all grief, yes, those feelings will likely change over time. They will likely, over the course of time, not feel as intense as they might initially. They might, those in the ups and the downs of that, like a trigger in the response to it, might not be as big over time. But I do think the feelings will always be there. So there's both good news and kind of tricky news within that. I think there is a feeling of unsettledness, anxiety, uncertainty, worry that may be always somewhere in the background. But I think if you do this work of learning how you navigate that, learning how you take care of yourself, learning also, you're also relearning your body. So as you heal and as your body heals, you're going to begin to rebuild some trust in your body, and your relationship with your body has been really affected here. And so we have to rebuild some trust or rebuild some connection with our body. So you begin to learn what your body is more capable of over time. So all of that over the course of time will change. But it may not ever go completely away. Okay, let's look at a couple more slides here, and then I'll bounce to back to Megan again. I'm looking at our time too. I'm wanting to be thoughtful about your evening. Okay, nurturing. How do we, okay, oh, this sounds really heavy and hard. How do I nurture this really lovely thing that you're talking about called post-traumatic growth? Okay, so I'm going to ask you to pay attention again. I want you to think about making space that in the middle of your distress, is there the potential for growth? Okay, this is hard. This is not easy. It's also going to challenge me. Can you and that's what I mean by bullet point number 2. Can you reframe that when your body gears up like this, or when that it's not a threat, it's your body's natural and appropriate response to a challenge. Your body is there ready to serve you. Your body is there ready to pay attention, to sit up on the edge of your seat, and to kind of help you through a moment. So it's not a threat, it's a challenge. Just changing that perspective can immediately begin to change your sense of confidence, your sense of self in that, like in your ability to experiment and to try new ways of caring for yourself. If you think it's a threat, we're going to withdraw, we're going to take cover, right? And we're going to retreat. If it's a challenge, you might stand up taller and you might try to have some courage in that, and try something new, right? I think about this as sometimes I talk to people about, again, I'm going to paint another picture. I warned you of this, I think, in pictures. But if you're driving down the highway, okay, and it's, a major highway, and you're going 65, 70 miles an hour, and suddenly it starts to pour rain, like downpour rain. I sure hope you don't keep driving the same way, right? I want you to be responsive to that in the car. Turn on your windshield wipers as a starting point. Perhaps slow down. Sometimes, I don't know if you've ever been on the highway, people turn on their hazard lights, right? So we can see the cars in front because visibility is so low. And sometimes we pull over to the side, right? So those are all skills. Those are all wise, thoughtful choices, right? We could say, I am never driving if I notice that there's rain on the radar. Okay, but then we never actually get to the thing that we need to go to, right? So we got to learn how to drive in the middle of a downpour. So that's what it's not a threat. It's can you do this? Can you build these skills? Can you build this ability to take care of yourself in the middle of this? Affirmation statements, right? So sometimes people talk about, like, how do we speak to ourselves in a kind and self-compassionate way? And I think there's value in that for sure. But there has also been some research done that when we just blindly say things like, I'm strong, I'm capable, I'm kind, whatever, and we don't believe it, it might actually hurt, right? Because then we begin to beat ourselves up a little bit, and we can apply some of what we kind of think of as toxic positivity to ourselves. Like, actually, I am not coping at all. I'm a mess. I can't get it together. I'm not strong. I'm not brave. I'm not this. Bull. So sometimes if we do those affirmation statements and they're just kind of floating out there and we don't believe them, they may not really work, or could even make it even harder for ourselves. So this is another challenge. Maybe it's some homework, and it's going to take some effort. Can you create affirmation statements with concrete examples? I am courageous when I know my limits and I rest. I am kind. I am beautiful. How about I am beautiful when I smile and I connect with children, right? I'm making things up. I'm trying to come up with things, but can you think about that for yourself? Can you give yourself examples of the things that matter a great deal to you about who you are and where you're showing it to the big world? And if you need help with that, sit with somebody that really knows you, and how do they see you? And then can you kind of use that and watch for, when I do this thing, I am kind. When I do this thing, I am brave. When I do this thing, I am capable. I am capable when I sit with all my medical bills and I organize them and I try to understand what I owe and what I need to appeal, right? That's like smart. That's organized. So how can you find concrete examples for what you do? I don't know who you are. I don't know what you're doing, but I would watch for that. What are the values that guide you? And by values, we can find, so many values, but if you have too many values, it's kind of meaningless, right? It's just kind of like you're spinning. Can you name 1 or 2 values that are your North Star? I want to be somebody that's authentic. I want to be somebody that is productive. I want to be somebody that is kind. I want to be somebody that has connected. I want to be somebody to family or friends. I want to be somebody that is, what are those values that matter to you? And can you can that be your North Star? That when you walk into hard moments, I'm going to do it, and I'm going to kind of find family and people around me, because connection and family are values of mine. So I'm going to bring them into those moments. I'm going to use them as some of the things that pull me through, right? Authenticity is a great value of mine. So I'm going to try to be honest with people about my real feelings and not, show them something that's not true. Now, a word on that is sometimes, we're many things. We can feel capable and positive and calm and present that to the world. And at the same time, recognize that we feel this spin of worry and fear in the background. We can be more than one feeling at the same time. That's not disingenuous. This is my last slide. So I'm going to say this slide, and then I'm going to go back to Megan, and then we can kind of just talk until our time is up. But where do I begin? What is the story? So what is the story you're telling yourself? I think you can begin by cultivating that habit of noticing yourself, by learning how to name those feelings, by beginning to kind of build those muscles of calming your body. I think when you think about that story, how's it making you feel? Is it working for you, or is it not working for you? That's a statement that I say in my office all the time when I'm telling them, asking them what they're thinking about or what they're planning to do to take care of themselves. Is it working, or is it not working? Shifting your mindset is a skill, right? So it's not an intuitive art. It is a skill, and it's something that you learn and that you kind of make choices and you work on over time. And I would say it's a journey. So we can't say that it's going to be it's like a light switch. It's like sometimes I'm merely capable of this and I see things in this way, and sometimes I don't. Okay. So we made space for both sides of the story, right? Watch for the way you talk to yourself. So notice that way language that you're giving to yourself, and experiment with different ways of expressing how you feel or think, right? So I would and when I say those 2 points, watch how you talk to yourself or experiment with different ways. If you're using razor sharp language, you might have razor sharp feelings. So I'll let that sit for a second. But sometimes there might people walk into my office and I'm like, or it just people in general, how's your day? Oh my God, it's been just a disaster. I'm devastated by this, or I'm completely like dying over it. That's a lot of razor sharp, intense language. We would say, you know what, today's felt a little bit overwhelming. Today I felt kind of just heavy and dreading kind of this appointment that's coming up. Watch the words we use and the way that we talk to ourselves or the way that we express, because that can also lead how we feel. Just experiment with it. Watch it for yourself. Sometimes, it's hard to make these changes or hard to begin to look at this differently. So you can always say yes, and that can change the way we feel, or add the word yet, at the end of things. That can kind of sometimes help us to kind of feel some balance. Okay, Megan, where are we? What's going on over there in the Q&A?
Yeah, we have a lot of really wonderful comments and questions. I will point out this didn't even occur to us timing wise, but thank you so much to those who pointed out. We are coming up on October, which is a huge trigger for a lot of our community, Pinktober, as many call it, Breast Cancer Awareness Month. And so this is extremely timely. So thank you to those who pointed that out and shared your
What an
experience.
opportunity to go to the
Yep.
mental gym, right? Like you're going to have so many moments when you're like, how am I doing? How am I doing? And to watch.
Mhm.
Mhm.
Yeah, so thank you for the handful of you who shared about that. The timing has worked out so that you do have a lot of these tools now moving into Breast Cancer Awareness Month. So thank you for sharing that. We had an attendee share something she's finding difficult as far as processing grief and trauma. She was diagnosed de novo stage 4. And some of the triggers she mentioned is watching other women with their young children, the overwhelming grief of knowing she won't get to watch her own children grow. So kind of how you navigate those feelings, the grief, the triggers when you're living with, her words, quote unquote, the worst case scenario.
Yeah, there's so much grief there. There's so much grief, and understandably so. And I'm going to resist problem solving that. And I'm going to resist making it better, because we have to go right through the ugly middle of grief. We can't walk around it. We can't try to solve it. It's heartbreaking and it's sad and it's just really devastating. And those feelings are not comfortable. And I think we want to clean them up and we want to make them better. Um, I would say, who in your life can sit with you in that feeling? Who in your life can allow you the space to just cry and to feel a great amount of grief in that and sadness? Um, and then to also think of that feeling, remember that visual I said of feelings are a circle, right? So we might not be able to take away the sadness of that, but in this exact right now, what can I do that might help calm me? You know what I'm going to do is I'm going to gather my friends together around me and we're going to parachute out of this for a minute and I'm going to get connected to my life right now, whether that's my friends and I'm going to have a movie night or I'm going to get, embrace what is mattering to me right now. This grief of what I won't have or what doesn't exist for me is a big hole and it's heavy, but I've also got to find a way to grab onto what's right in front of me, what's right now. There's a beautiful quote that I love by Julia Cameron. I'm gonna say it wrong, but I'm gonna try to paraphrase it. It's something about when the future is too uncertain, is when the future is too scary to fathom, and when my past is too heartbreaking to kind of remember. Sometimes I find this only safe place for me is my exact now. That the exact now is the only safe space. So that grief can be overwhelming, make space for that, allow it, find comfort, find the things that can soothe you through that. And then how do you connect with your exact right now?
That's so powerful, and it goes along with another comment and question someone had, and I have a feeling your advice would be similar. This individual was saying that her biggest fear was how treatment would impact her fertility, and now she's living her biggest fear. Everything they've tried has not worked to build a family so far. So it's a huge source of trauma and grief, and sounds like a lot of what you said, just said would be applicable to that as well, if there's anything else you would add.
I would say that there are therapists that specialize in fertility and understand the uniqueness of this, what we call often a disenfranchised grief. Like when we think of grief, often it is we're grieving something that existed, right? And what you're grieving is you're grieving the hope and the dream and the of what you wanted, which is a bit disenfranchised and abstract. And sometimes people get that around you and sometimes people do not. And so it makes finding support for people who understand the intensity of that loss sometimes harder. Um, and there are therapists who specialize in fertility and can be helpful in that way. And some of that work sometimes is really allowing yourself to fully paint the picture of what you dreamed for and really to kind of name it and go there about what you envisioned about that baby and what you envisioned who you were as a mother and a nursery and all of that, so that there's actually something that then you can hold and grieve. So that work can be done too. It's kind of a different type of grief work, but it's important to really honor that.
Back a few slides ago, when you talked about connecting with the five senses and grounding, one of the questions was, how do you ground with your five senses when your body is physically in pain? And they noted that when they're in pain, they have a hard time being present and maybe connecting with an exercise like that.
Such a great question. And I'm going to just go ahead and expand your question to pain, discomfort, loss of your body, scars. Many of your bodies have likely very much changed. And so to use your body as a source of grounding is incredibly complicated and, in fact, can be the next trigger, right? So, how do you expand your sense of your body, right? So, five senses, sure, but can you pay attention to other systems, other ways your body is functioning. So that's going to require a little bit more attention, but can you feel the way your lungs and diaphragm and breath are going in and out? Can you really visualize and feel that? Can you slow down and can you notice through the pain or around the pain your heartbeat or your pulse, right? Can you feel, a sense of hunger, right? Can you find other systems or other ways to feel your body that are kind of like anchored? Like if you think of like the trunk of a tree that are inside of that deeper or more solid. The pain is existing around it for sure, but what's through it that you can connect to and kind of lean in on? I don't know if that makes sense, but that's a practice that kind of think through, how do I breathe through this? How do I find something that's beyond it?
We also have just a couple of comments. I think it's wonderful to hear kind of what everyone's thinking and what's on their mind. And we'll also give Julie's voice a break for a second. She's given us so many
Ah.
wonderful tips and resources. There's just a lot of gratefulness for really recognizing this as something that everyone is going through. I think there was one conversation in particular about loving the idea of a graduate degree in self-care and how,
Hmm. Oh, Megan, I lost you. I don't know if anybody else.
oh, can you hear me?
Now I can. Yep.
Okay, might have just broken up for a second. But just a lot of people really grateful for this topic being covered. There was a question about how it's impacted relationships with family. The attendee who made the comment said that they were also diagnosed during COVID, which I'm sure a lot of people on this call can relate to. And so that certainly impacted who, as a support system, who is able to be with them both during treatment, or even I'm sure those of you who would normally have family members coming in and out of the house, that was an impact as well. And so this individual was saying that it made them feel extremely alone, and kind of the way they ended up handling cancer was keeping it as far away from the people they love the most. They didn't want their diagnosis to disrupt their children's or husband's lives, and that led to maybe not processing it all fully. So both the physical distance, but then creating a little bit of an emotional distance as well. And they don't know kind of how to continue processing it. And I will add maybe for others too, how to bring those relationships back to a way that feels helpful and supportive. That's my addition to it, because I'm sure some other attendees might have that
Mhm.
question or perspective as well.
I think that there is something that is kind of very protective, right? In that choice to kind of separate and pull back and not let all of this become infiltrating into every relationship. And maybe that's, there's a piece of how do we reconnect? How do we understand ourselves first? Like, what is it about this relationship that is important to me that they understand and that they know, or that that I feel like comfortable going to for certain needs to be met? So you might take some time to consider those people in your friends and family group, and who is it that you're feeling disconnected from? What is it that you're wanting to rebuild there? And how do you talk to that need? What is that need and what would you hope for? I think there's also a piece of this that, you know, many cancer survivors truly feel the most seen and the most heard in the intimacy of their distress around their diagnosis by other survivors. So coming into this group or finding a group there's so many platforms, and YSC certainly has them too, where you have a safe space or you have a group of other survivors that you go to with the ins and outs of how you feel and how you're navigating it. That can be so, so, so helpful, and then allow you to revisit these other relationships and the other quadrants of your identity. You're not just a cancer diagnosis, right? You're many things, and you have many other pieces of who you are. So sometimes we want to preserve these other relationships for this is my professional self. This is who I want to be as a mother. This is who I am as a spouse or a friend, right? So when I have this other very sacred space where I can talk about my worry, my fear, my unsettledness, my distress around cancer, and I feel really seen and really heard there, it somehow comforts and soothes that so that I've got something left and I can kind of join back in these other relationships with other pieces of myself. How's that?
Yeah, we're going to try to hit, I think, just a couple more questions. So pardon me if I'm combining a few and want to, of course, get to as many as possible. Someone asked a really powerful question. I know you mentioned, Julie, before about kind of trying to live in the now. And so the question was, what if your now doesn't feel like a safe place?
Um, yeah, that makes sense to me. Okay, so my answer to that is a little deeper. I wish you were in my office and we were having therapy right now. But I often tell people in my office that your feelings of distress are often signaling or signposting an unmet need. Okay, so that's going to take a little work. You're going to need to look at that feeling in the eye, notice it, and what are you needing? And it's really easy to think of a need as like a strategy. Like I need, help around the house. I need you to talk to me in a certain way. I need my body to feel better in this way. You know what is, but the need actually might be partnership, connection, ease, calm, okay? And how then, what are the ways in which those needs might be met? How can we begin to think about, I have this need, I'm feeling very lonely, I'm feeling isolated, or my body is really hurting me, and my need is ease and comfort. Okay, so what can I do to meet that need? So sometimes when we're in our present and we feel a lot of rumble and unsettledness, what's under it? What's the unmet need underneath there? And what are some ways that maybe that you can meet that need?
Think, and we, as I said, we have so many great questions. I wish we could get to all of them. I'm gonna, for our last question, just combine a few of them. There have been comments and questions both on people feeling uh, disassociated from their feelings, where they can't even necessarily feel. They are disconnecting either in certain situations or just overall. And then on the flip side of it, somebody mentioned that they don't trust their own emotions or their feelings. So it's kind of the two sides of the coin, and how maybe to reconnect with their own feelings. That's my kind of combining of the two, how to reconnect with those who feel dissociated, but also those who aren't feeling trustful of themselves or their emotions.
First of all, like what an incredible sense of self-awareness that I'm going to say right now that you're noticing that that's self-awareness, and that there's a blank spot here. There's a piece here where I feel like I don't have enough information, right? Again, I'm going to go back to that very beginning slide that I said that your distress shows up in three ways. It shows up in your thinking, it shows up in your feeling, and it shows up in your body. I will go on to say that over the course of my professional practice, I do think that people tend to have more clarity, or they notice their distress probably in one of those ways more obviously. So I certainly have people in my office who also would have a hard time naming how they're feeling, but they can tell me everything about what they're thinking and what's spinning around in their brain, right? Or other people who have a hard time, there's motions are just spilling and spilling and spilling, and they're having a really difficult time understanding what these are about. Like, oh, right? Like I don't get why this emotion is just kind of so big for me. So but they're both there. So for my feeler in that room, the effort needs to be around how do we begin to tune into the thinking and the thoughts that are behind that feeling. And for my thinkers, how do we begin to grow and broaden your feeling vocabulary so that you kind of begin to understand, okay, that thought is making me feel overwhelmed. It's kind of quiet, but that overwhelm in me is just kind of like I'm stuck. right? Or I'm feeling, if I begin to think and allow for those thoughts more, then I begin to open up more doors. Often during a cancer diagnosis, we get very compartmentalized, and that's protective. And compartmentalization is a defense mechanism. It's a way to protect ourselves. So we have to kind of compartmentalize. I'm just going to go to this treatment. I'm going to do this really uncomfortable procedure. I'm going to kind of get through to whatever it is. And in that process, we kind of shut things down. When we think of emotional regulation, it is a spectrum. So often we think that people are struggling with emotional regulation because they're spilling and their emotions are everywhere. But when emotional regulation is really constricted and tight, that is also not helpful. Or, that's, we need to have an ability to live in our emotions and to feel them and to experience them. So you might be over here on this constricted side. And how do you begin to open it up and pay attention to it and name it? What are the ways that those show up for you? Some people write, and that begins to kind of spill out of them in different ways. Therapy can be a space where I've had sessions with people where initially when they come in, I'm doing a lot of kind of pulling and asking, and then over time they begin to be able to articulate and to share in those feelings a lot more. So talking and listening to other survivors begins to give you that language and give you that kind of, oh, that's me. Oh, that's, I'm feeling the same way. Okay, then that's putting words to what I'm experiencing, and that's helpful.
That's great. Thank you, Julie, so much. There was a very specific question in the chat around just access to mental health counseling and the costs associated with that. I would say to that individual, please reach out and we'll gather some resources for you. And I will also coordinate with Julie to see if she has any resources she might want to include to that conversation. And we know that is certainly a sticking point for many people who are seeking out mental health counseling and professional support. But please know there are resources, and we certainly want to provide those to you. So definitely reach out, and we'll shoot over some resources and links for you. Thank you so much, everyone, for being here tonight. A couple of housekeeping items you will see before or right as we close out of the webinar, a few evaluation and feedback questions. It'll take you, I promise, about 2 minutes to answer them. It'll pop right up on your screen. And those questions are extremely helpful to us for continuing to grow and enhance our programming. So we would love to hear from you. And thank you in advance for answering those. Thank you to Julie. This was amazing. There were so many great tidbits and really tactical things I think we can all take away from tonight. And to all of you, just for sharing and being so vulnerable. It was really special to be with all of you tonight. We'd also like to thank our sponsors. We would not be able to do this programming without them, specifically Spencer's, Merck, Daiichi Sankyo, Novartis, AstraZeneca, Gilead Oncology, Pfizer Oncology, Menarini Stemline, Eisai, Tercera, Macrogenics, Natrel, and Foundation Medicine. I know that's a long list. We're so lucky to have all of them and are just so appreciative of that support. If you are interested in other YSC programs and support, if this is your first time attending a YSC event or you're familiar with us, I'm sure we even saw some of you this last weekend at our Wellness Summit. If you're interested in any future programming, peer support, virtual hangouts where you can, in an environment that's a little more casual, be communicating with your peers and offering insights, please visit our website, youngsurvival.org. As I mentioned earlier, this is also one of a series of events as part of YSC's virtual summit. We'll be having 3 more events before the end of the calendar year. So please keep checking your social media, your email, and we'll be sending that information out. The same way you found out about this event, you'll find out about those. And we do have a link, which we'll include in any follow-up information, which is bit.ly/YSC Virtual Summit 24. But as I said, we will continue to keep in communication on all of the above. So thank you, Julie, again. Thank you, everyone, for being here. And I hope you all do one of the things tonight before you go to bed that Julie mentioned. The 5 senses, I think, would be a great probably way to kind of wind down and get yourselves ready for bed. I hope everyone's going to sleep early. I know I am, and some good self-care there. So thank you, everyone, and have a great night.
Thank you.